Good evening, Who Dat Nation, and a happy Wednesday to our Bayou Blitz family. I hope everybody's doing well out there. I wanted to throw out my apologies for our late start. Brendan and I were I could make it sound business-like and say we were having a pre-production meeting, or I could just be real with you guys and just say that we were bullshitting. I think I'll stray towards the latter. And nonetheless, I am Bob Rose. I am one of your co-hosts for your Bayou Blitz tonight, and joining me is my partner Brendan Boylan. Brendan, happy Wednesday to you.
Yeah, happy Wednesday. 30 seconds in, you got me changing the rating. I mean, this is a new record for Bob. No, everything's great. Everything's great. A little bit slower in the Saints world this week, which was expected. Obviously, leading up to draft and draft coverage, that dominates really like a couple months, depending on obviously the team and where they finish. And this year with the Saints not qualifying for the playoffs and their season being done for quite a while, eyes have been fixated on obviously the Sean Payton stuff. And then as soon as they got that pick from the Sean Payton trade, it was everything was on the NFL draft. So I'd say nice to have new faces in the building and on the practice fields and in the facilities, but also a little nice to breathe and catch up because there's been a lot that's happened with the New Orleans Saints. So ironically, and I almost forgot until Bob actually brought it up in our pre-production meeting. Come on, Bob. We actually did some work.
We can combine a pre-production bullshit meeting.
There we go. Okay, 2 minutes in, two rating changes. No, we didn't talk about the schedule release last week because our podcast is the day before the schedule release happened. So the New Orleans Saints schedule, obviously, some of the big ones are the Saints are not in prime time a whole lot this year. I think was one of the biggest takeaways for me. Obviously, in the Sean Payton, Drew Brees era, the Saints were in prime time a lot, and particularly at home for prime time a lot, which again, not so much the case this year. The Saints will be coming to my neck of the woods week 2. That was one that has already been circled for me. Monday Night Football in Carolina. It'll be Bryce Young's first home game for the Carolina Panthers. He looks ultra tiny compared to his linemen so far at rookie minicamp. You guys, I'm sure, have seen the memes. But Bob, what were some of your takeaways from the New Orleans Saints schedule release?
Well, as far as the lack of primetime appearances and only one of those 3 primetime games at home, that. Of course, that jumps out to you, but remember too that if the Saints are as successful as we think that they could be, and we certainly hope that they will be, a lot of those late season games could be flexed into a Sunday night time slot, and our good friend Roger Goodell and the league office has now made Monday night a potential flex option too. So if the Saints are playing very well, we'll call it around Thanksgiving, then we could see a couple of those games flexed to a primetime slot later on. Other than that, I know everybody wants to say how easy the Saints schedule looks. And on paper it does. I mean, they only faced 4 teams that had a winning record last year, but I don't pay much attention to that because there is so much. I don't like to use the word parity when it comes to the NFL, but I will certainly say that there is so much changeover in the standings and in teams' personnel, from year to year that you really never know what you're going to get. I mean, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they didn't finish with a winning record, but they were a playoff team a year ago. Now they're projected to be one of the league's, one of the NFL's worst teams, if you believe those Vegas odds. So, I mean, it's situations like that. But the more tangible things that jump out to me is the fact that none of their away games are in cold weather cities after early October. I felt for sure that Goodell would send the Saints to Green Bay or to New England, or both, late November, late December kind of thing, and that didn't happen. But the negative thing is, New Orleans has back-to-back road games. Back-to-back road weeks 3 times this year, back-to-back road games 4 times. The bye week splits one of those things up. Meanwhile, contrastly, they only have back-to-back home games 1 time, and that's a 3 consecutive week homestand, in early December. Now, that's a good time to get consecutive home games, but this team is going to really have to start out strongly, obviously for Dennis Allen's job security, and to carve out a prominent place in the standings, but they're going to have to do it on the road too. So that's what jumps out to me from a negative standpoint.
For me, I think the biggest thing is what you said about the away games in cold weather being earlier in the season. And that is one thing we actually did talk about last Wednesday, is how we both expected one, if not both those games to end up being a December game at Lambeau or December game in Foxborough. But the fact that you knock both those out within the first 5 games of the season, that's a plus. That is definitely a plus. Nice to have some home stands, like you said. I like the fact that this year, especially, it almost feels as if when the Saints are playing different teams from different divisions, they're almost packaged together.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of, to me, there's nothing special about that. I don't think there's any importance to that. But I do like the fact, like week 7, week 8, or week 6, week 7, week 8, it's all AFC South, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jacksonville, Indy. Week 9, week 10, Chicago, Minnesota, NFC North. And then you get the bye, the Falcons, and then Detroit, so another NFC North team. So for whatever reason, I guess just because it's appealing, aesthetically appealing, if you will, I do like the fact that they're playing a lot of teams from the same division back-to-back weeks. In a weird way, too, I think play style is very similar within each division. You could argue against that, but I think the style of play is similar because that's the teams that you guys face year in and year out.
Mm-hmm.
So you do draw similarities from those teams. I think that could benefit the Saints. Those are just and then for me too, the bye week, which, do I think it's overrated when your bye week is? Yes, I do. I do think that there's a lot put into, oh, that's an early bye. Oh, that's a late bye. Yeah, it has something to do with getting rest at the right time. I do like the fact that the Saints this year is almost smack dab middle of the season, especially considering all of the new faces in key positions, not just on the field, but on the sidelines as well. For New Orleans, I think it's right after week 10, or is it week 10?
It's week 11, so you're right.
Right after week 10. So I think that's a really good time to sit there and evaluate where you are, make some adjustments, and then at that point, I do believe, and I'll pull up the schedule on my end so I don't misspeak. Yes, you still go and you have 4 divisional games after your bye week. So to sit there, regroup, kind of figure out, okay, what did we really like out of the first 10 weeks? What did we not like? What can we change? What can we adjust before you go play those super meaningful games at the end of the year? Because, I mean, you said it best, Bob. I mean, the Bucs didn't have a winning record last year. They won the division. If the Saints go and that back half of the season, they go 4-0 against the 2 games they have against the Falcons, the Panthers, and the 1 game against the Panthers and the 1 game against Tampa Bay. I mean, the Saints could be a playoff team just off those 4 games by themselves. So you never know. I actually think the bye falls at a good time. I do think it's overrated. Be the first to tell you that. I do think it actually falls in the Saints' favor this year, which is nice. So I think those are my biggest takeaways. I do want to talk about the fact that there's only 1 primetime game in the Superdome this year. It feels odd. Yeah. And I know that in our time covering the Saints since 2015, and Bob and I will be the first to tell you, 15 and 16 were awful years, despite the fact that they did have a handful of primetime games those years. Even in those terrible seasons, shoot, you want to throw 14, they weren't bad. 12, they were bad, but that was the suspension year for Sean. So, I mean, you could even take the last decade, right, of Saints football and say, they had a lot of primetime football games, and we were spoiled with it. The Saints were on Monday night a lot, Thursday night a lot. I think a lot of times that they've came here, at least, that I've had the opportunity to go and see it in person, they've been in primetime here in Charlotte a lot, and they do again this year. But it always felt like the Saints got 2, 3, some of those good years, 4 primetime slots in the Superdome. And we all knew the record. Saints in the Superdome in prime time for that long stretch. It was like 26. I'm just making stuff up. It's close, I'm sure, though. It's like 26 and 4 or something over the last 30 games in primetime in the Superdome. It was that good. And because it was that good, the Saints got rewarded with a lot of primetime football games at home. And that's just not the case this year. And I know the Saints have had a major dip in terms of national media attention because Drew's retired now that Sean Payton is no longer with the team. But to see only one primetime game in the Superdome, Bob, weird. And that could change. Like week 18 is a game. You were talking about games that could be flexed. Week 18 is one that I'm going to circle, highlight, whatever against Atlanta. Do I think Atlanta's going to compete for the division over Carolina? Probably not. I see it being New Orleans, Carolina, Atlanta, Tampa. Super early prediction, but that's the way I see it. I think Carolina's uber talented. It's just how quick can Bryce Young click with everybody? And sometimes that takes a while for rookie quarterbacks, but he played at the highest level in the SEC. So we'll have to see. But that week 18 game against Atlanta at home, if it comes down to a winner goes, loser stays home, that could easily be flexed to a primetime slot, along with some of those other matchups as well. But I'm almost flabbergasted that the Saints are only at home for primetime once this year.
Yeah, and that's a Thursday night game against one of the playoff teams, one of the few playoff teams on their schedule from 2022, and that's Jacksonville. I think a lot of people just assume it's because the Saints have not made the playoffs the last couple of years. And while that does have something to do with it, I think it's just as much, if not more, to do with two other factors. Number one, there's no Drew Brees. We know that the league and the networks like to market the marquee names, and most of the marquee names are at the quarterback position. The Saints have been a little bit of a musical chair at that position since Drew is retired. Derek Carr could change that, but until he does, it's just fact that the New Orleans Saints don't have a Drew Brees at quarterback. Secondly, you have to look at, and if I was a network executive, I'd be looking very hard at this. You have to look at the last 2 years, and the Saints have laid some absolute eggs on national television at home in primetime slots. That Buffalo Thanksgiving whooping, the Miami Dolphin COVID game, the ridiculousness of COVID had a lot to do with that. But last year, the Baltimore Ravens, that was an ugly game, at home. And I know I'm missing a couple here, but those are just the ones that stand out to me. So, the Saints have to prove that they're going to put a better product on the field, and they could earn those primetime slots back. And again, you look at the Falcons in week 18, that's already a game that the NFL schedule makers have not even committed to whether it's going to be Saturday the 6th or Sunday, January 7th. A couple other late season games that could be flexed. A lot of people believe that the Detroit, myself included, believe that the Detroit Lions are primed for a big jump. And the Saints host Detroit on December 3rd. If both teams are playing well going into Thanksgiving, which is just 2 weeks prior to that, that's a game that could be flexed. At home against the Giants on December 17th. New York was a playoff team last year, and if they play to that level again, and if New Orleans plays well, that's another game that could be flexed. I can't picture the December 10th home rematch against Carolina being moved to prime time, because they rarely put two divisional games in prime time in the same year. And you're looking at the Rams on Thursday the 21st. That's week of Christmas. That's already prime time. Buccaneers on December 31st. I suppose it's possible that could be flexed, but nobody expects Tampa Bay to be playing well. But certainly New Orleans has the opportunity to play their way into some primetime games late in the year.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of games where the Saints were really good. in prime time over the years. I think the ones that stand out to me are some of the later Drew Brees years, right? You have obviously Christmas Day, the Alvin Kamara game. You have the at Tampa Bay, was that 19? Where they won 30, not the 9-0 game, because that was not fun to watch. But in Tampa,
38-3. That was 20. That was COVID
20,
year.
okay, so I was going to say those are the two that jump out where the Saints balled out. But again, to your point, Drew was still there. He was still a marquee name in the NFL. It's easy to promote that. And this is something I don't know if you and I have talked about on the air before, but wasn't it weird going into 2021 when the Saints were on primetime, where you'd see the special or the advertisement for the game on ESPN, NBC, whatever, and it would be like Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans Saints. You're like, what? Like, what? Don't you mean Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints? But no, to your point, it's quarterbacks are so marketable. I mean, look at the average quarterbacks in the league that are super marketable. One for me, and I don't understand personally. I don't understand why the hype is where it is, and this also goes into one of our hobbies in sports cards and whatnot. And a name that continues to rise in sports cards is Tua. And I look at Tua, and yeah, he had some moments last year, but he's also one hit away from never playing football again. And even admitted to thinking about not coming back after the last concussion. So, but very marketable name. So that's the point is, Derek Carr could definitely get the Saints there. If they play well this year, look at next year's schedule. Let's say the Saints go, I'll be modest. What if the Saints go 10-7 and win the NFC South, and win a playoff game? At that point, you could definitely look back to this episode tonight when the schedule comes out next season and go, oh, well, the Saints earned this many more primetime home slots because of the success they had a year ago. Just like any sport, it's not just the NFL. It goes for baseball. It goes for hockey. It goes for basketball. People don't care what you did 3 years ago. They care about what you did last year.
Yep.
And that's it. It does not matter who's on your roster. It doesn't matter about the franchise legacy that you may have. If you didn't perform a year ago, people don't care.
Nope.
They don't care to throw you on primetime television. Even if you have like an up and coming star, or you have a grizzly veteran who's looking to chase that last ring, like, if it doesn't matter. It's all about, what's the old business saying? What have you done for me lately? And that's what schedule makers look at, because that's where the money is. And those are the games that are going to sell tickets. Those are the games that are going to make NBC, Amazon, NFL Network, ESPN, Fox, CBS. That's what's going to make those guys money. And that's all they care about.
You better believe it. Now, there is one game in 2024 that's going to be on the Saints schedule. If I'm not mistaken, the NFC South will play the AFC West in 2024, which means, of course, that the New Orleans Saints and Denver Broncos will face off. And particularly, as far as where the games are played, it would depend on how the teams finish in the standings. But if Denver is coming to New Orleans, you tell me that you can't see the NFL schedule opening up with the Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos at the New Orleans Saints to open up Week 1 on Monday Night Football in 2024.
That would make a lot of sense. It would also make a lot of sense if they just elect if they go to Las Vegas that year. It would make a lot of sense for them to schedule that as a primetime slot as well. Derek Carr's return to Las Vegas. Dennis Allen's first game again as a head coach against his former team, and all the other Raiders that are going to be in New Orleans. Hunter Renfrow. We could talk about that a little bit later.
Nice segue. The Saints have made some personnel moves this week.
They have.
They've signed 6 of their 7 draft choices. The only draft choice that remains unsigned is the second round pick, defensive end Isaiah Foskey. I expect that'll get done in the next week or so. But New Orleans says, I got my list flying around here somewhere. To get you folks caught up, New Orleans has. I think they officially signed Foster Moreau before we went on air last week. Yes.
Yes, they have.
Okay. But since then, they brought in 2 XFL defensive linemen, defensive tackle Jack Heflin, defensive end Nico Lalos. Nico spent some time on the Saints practice squad last year, so he's a little bit familiar with the franchise. And then the signing that has everybody going out of their minds in a good way, and I don't quite understand it. Is former Steelers wide receiver James Washington. Now before we talk about Washington, the rumors continue to fly, and it's mostly fueled by fans, that Hunter Renfrow of the Las Vegas Raiders is on the trading block. Renfro's under contract for the next 2 years. He would be, if he is indeed dealt after June 1st, he would be an $11.2 million cap hit for whoever trades for him. Now, of course, those numbers can be shuffled in a renegotiated deal. Given the signing of Washington, and we'll get into his impact in a moment, given the signing of Washington, off-season acquisitions of Brian Edwards and free agency and drafting A.T. Perry, would you, if you were Mickey Loomis and if you were Dennis Allen, would you make a strong move for Hunter Renfrow? And if so, why?
I'm biased. I'll go ahead and start with that. I'm biased. I saw him a lot at Clemson, being in the area, right? Charlotte to Clemson's only a couple hours. Loyal viewers know that Deshaun Watson and I grew up like 5 minutes from each other. So obviously following Deshaun's career at Clemson as well, a lot of Hunter Renfrow. Gardner-Webb University offered Hunter Renfrow a full ride scholarship, and he declined to walk on at Clemson as well. So I know that from my time covering the Running Bulldogs. So, man, the one thing about Hunter that I think is really undervalued is everybody loves a good story in media, right? And Hunter had to work for everything that he got. And wasn't even viewed, when he got drafted by, at that time, Oakland, he was a day 3 pick and was not viewed as a guy that would really develop into anything. Like, he might end up being a good, receiver 4. He's a slot guy, so he didn't have great athleticism, great speed, right? There's nothing that jumped out about Hunter Renfrow, but he's a really hard worker. Derek Carr really enjoyed his time when they were playing together. One thing the Saints don't really have and they haven't for a long time, if you really think about it, is a true slot receiver. You could, especially going into this season, you could sit there and slot a couple guys that could play that spot. But I think Hunter Renfrow would be an upgrade. Now, with that said, obviously, there's a lot of questions about health with New Orleans and receiver. And DJ, I see you in the comments talking about Michael Thomas. We'll get to that. But don't really know where Mike is. He's supposed to be ready for training camp. A.T. Perry might be the steal of the draft, right? We talked a little bit about that last week and the draft show, certainly. But I think Renfrow would be an upgrade, and the Saints do have cap room, which is not something a lot of us are used to saying at all.
Right.
We'll say, the Saints have cap room, but it is like the college kid that has 2 cents in his bank account. That's what the Saints usually have in cap room, but they actually have cap room, and that's even after signing their draft picks. So it wouldn't be impossible to make it happen if you deal some draft picks. I'm not anything crazy. I don't think Hunter Renfrow demands like a first, second, or third round draft pick. I think you could package a couple day 3 picks and maybe a player, right? I'll make you really happy in this scenario. If you want to package like Traquan Smith and a 5th round pick, that might be enough to get it done, especially if you have a disgruntled guy that doesn't want to be there. You're just trying to get anything back at that point. So would I do it, or would I take a serious look if I'm Mickey Loomis or guys in that front office? Absolutely. Not just because of the player, the competitor, and the hard worker that Renfro is. And I know you guys are going to be super tired of hearing what I'm about to say. But yet, when you sign a franchise quarterback, don't you want to surround him with people not only he likes? I think that's important in any situation when you have a franchise player of any position. Surround him with people that he's comfortable with, he likes, and he has already built up something with. Being able to take Brian Edwards over to New Orleans was one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to take Hunter Renfro, who is one of his leading targets, if not his leading target over the last 2 years, is a completely different story. I think the Saints should definitely take a look at it. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I really think the Saints should take a look. I'm not getting my hopes up that it's going to happen, but it is your job as a front office to leave no stone unturned when you're talking about maximizing a roster. And when a player like this becomes available that already has a relationship with a lot of the guys in your locker room, you better at least be calling and seeing what's up.
Yeah, I will agree with that. And the theme of the New Orleans Saints offseason has been familiar faces. We've talked about it ad nauseum about the coaching staff. You just mentioned Brian Edwards playing with Carr with the Raiders. Obviously, Foster Moreau did too. Colin Saunders played with Tyrann Mathieu and Tano Passanio in Kansas City. It would certainly fit alongside what the New Orleans Saints theme is this offseason. So that's something to take a look at. And I'm like you, I've always been a fan of Hunter Renfro, back through the Clemson days. Absolutely loved his film. When I did the draft profile on him when he came out, I believe I was working for a different network then, who I still enjoy their stuff, but for competitors' sake, I won't mention who that was. I've always been a fan of the way Renfro plays, and he is a guy that can play both outside and the slot. Terrific route runner, catches everything that's thrown his direction. So if you have even a little bit of doubt about Michael Thomas's health, remember that he is most likely going to be a free agent at the end of the year. Whereas you would, if you make a deal for Hunter Renfro, you have a couple years with him at least. Those are the pluses. The minuses are you also have a wide receiver room that already has Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, forget wide receiver room, a pass catcher room that has Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau. You could count Alvin Kamara, even though we believe at this stage he's probably going to start the year on the suspended list. So there's only so many footballs to go around. So I guess my follow-up question to you is a lot of also Saints fans, but Saints players too, have made this recruitment pitch on Twitter to former Chiefs free agent defensive end, Frank Clark. So, given what we know the Saints have at wide receiver, given what we know that the Saints have at defensive end, and we're including Isaiah Foskey in this, Brendan Boylan, you're the general manager again. You can make a move for one player. Forget what it costs. Let's just say you could afford the salary for the one player, and you don't mind giving up whatever the Raiders are asking for a trade for Renfro. But you can only make a move for one of those players. Would wide receiver Hunter Renfro fit better into what you need right now, or would a defensive end Frank Clark fit better?
I'll have opening statements for both, and then tell you what I would do. I think I can only do justice of trying to explain why both make sense. I'll keep it relatively short. Frank Clark makes a lot of sense. Why? Well, while the Saints are deeper at edge rusher this year than they have in arguably the last 2 years, it's very youthful outside of Cameron Jordan, right? Foskey, obviously a rookie. Peyton Turner, without even looking, I don't think he's played 20 games in his NFL career or been active for 20 games, right? No chance.
Nope.
No chance. Carl Granderson is in year 4, 5.
Yep. I'm pretty sure 4.
4. So still relatively young in his career, and a guy that very much like Hunter Renfrow was not expected to be much of anything and has became a pretty good contributor to the Saints defensive line. One of your guys, another former Chief, Tenio Passanio, who can play. He's really, I don't want to use the word Swiss Army knife because that's Taysom Hill, but he's a guy who can play just about anywhere on the line effectively. And has definitely made a home in New Orleans for being a versatile threat. I feel like I'm missing somebody on the defensive line.
Other than Bosky, no, I think
okay. So you have like 4 guys there, 5 guys there that could play in those spots, but really outside of Cameron Jordan, you have 3 of those guys that have played less than 5 years in the NFL. Passanio, I think, is in year 6 or 7. So
he came out in 2017. So yeah.
So a little bit more of a veteran presence. He's won Super Bowls. He's played with Frank Clark before.
Mm-hmm.
That's vital too. I think while the expectation from fans would be Clark to come in and Clark to contribute and be the dominant force that he has been throughout his NFL career, I think you'd almost have to temper those expectations a little bit, because while you do expect him to produce at a high level, I think if you sign Clark, you also have to factor in he's there to be a mentor to those young guys, right? Like Clark can't come in and Clark would have to come in and understand, hey, we drafted Foskey for a reason in round 2. We drafted Peyton Turner in round 1 a couple years ago for a reason. Like, while you're here to produce on the field, you're also here to set an example and help these guys out as well, which a lot of guys, at that stage of their career, a lot of those guys understand that that's a part of the job. Yeah. That's what's expected. Doesn't always happen, but that's what's expected. So that would be the case for Clark, is you're adding some veteran presence, a guy who can come in and contribute right away, but that is also going to set an example for those 3 young guys I mentioned before. And then he'd also have some, he'd have an old friend on the defensive line in Passanio as well, which is a plus.
And Saunders.
Because I was only talking about edge rushers. Thank you.
Right.
But yeah, no, he'd have 2 guys that he's familiar with, and that always helps, especially when you sign. I don't want to say this is late in the process by any means, because we've seen guys get picked up super late, like in training camp late, but it would be like the 2nd and 3rd wave of free agency. So having familiar faces, a common theme, is always helpful. When it comes to Hunter Renfrow, I kind of gave my spiel already, but all in all, bringing in a guy like that with Derek Carr in his first year in a new system, where you already have familiarity with each other and you already know, like, okay, we might call it something different here in New Orleans, but I know and Hunter knows that if he's running this route, this is how the timing's going to work.
Yeah.
Right. And really, that's all it is. Yes, teams run different plays, but a lot of it's just learning new terminology. But, Bob and I could go and learn Spanish over the next 3 years and do a podcast in Spanish, but I still know how to bounce off Bob, and Bob still knows how to bounce off me, despite there being, it's just different terminology used.
See,
and it would work. Gracias, mi amigo. But all in all, that would be the case for Hunter Renfrow. So for me, the old saying is defense wins championships. And one thing the Saints really missed over the last 2 years is having a running mate with Cameron Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you and I kind of talked about that. Is like, think about all the guys that have came and gone where we thought, oh, we finally got it. Biggest one for me will always be Junior Gillette. As a guy, we finally got, that guy to pair. And something's always happened. Or even interior guys, right? Like, I look at a guy like Nick Fairley, like that should have worked. He should have been in New Orleans a lot longer than he
yeah.
was, and it's unfortunate. And you look at guys like Sheldon Rankins and you look at Big O, who had these impacts and it didn't last, and contracts came in and this and that. Cam Jordan really hasn't had dominant parts on that line with him. So bringing a Frank Clark in would benefit that. And we talked about it throughout the draft, right? I'm going to definitely get this wrong because it's late and I haven't had a whole lot of coffee or sleep. But it's about finding guys that can put quarterbacks in the dirt.
Mhm.
And that's something New Orleans has severely missed over the years. Outside of that one weird year from Davenport, where we again thought, oh, okay, we finally have a running mate.
Yeah.
And then it just didn't happen. So for me, as much as I like Hunter Renfrow, I do think the Saints, in terms of pass catching weapons, and you alluded to that long list of names, is a lot better than it was a couple years ago. And shout out to our colleague John Hendricks, who tweeted something out along the lines of, we came a long way, and quote retweeted a Sean Payton quote about the wide receiver room of,
Yeah.
we like what we have in the receiver room. Apparently Dennis didn't, because it's a lot different than it was just 2 years ago, Sean. But no, I'm taking the defense. I'm getting another veteran on that defense. And looking at the history of Dennis Allen, I wouldn't be surprised if that move happens either, because look at the guys that have been added since Dennis has came on, not just as a head coach, but even those years as a defensive coordinator. He continued not to add the big flashy pieces, but add guys that were veterans that fit the scheme. Quan Alexander is a good example of that.
Yeah. And all of them are great points. And, hey, listen, I think
I made a great point. Can you say that louder? Can we make sure this is recorded? I will use that the rest of my life, that somebody thought I made a great point.
As you should. But I also think that both Hunter Renfrow and Frank Clark would be considered what I'd call luxury pieces for the way this roster sits right now. And like you, I already made my pros and cons list about Hunter. When it comes to Frank Clark, and you're also talking about two players who have been. Frank Clark has been a starter for a long time. Hunter Renfrow was a number one. Was the Raiders' number one wideout before Devontae Adams last year, and even then he was the number two. So you talk about guys who have been starters for their previous teams, and neither would be the starter if they came to New Orleans. But I think that Frank Clark would fill a bigger role, a more important role, because, like you said, they need an established presence. For as much as New Orleans was what, third, fourth, in team sacks last year, but you look a little bit closer, they rank near the bottom of the league in pressures and hurries. And their defensive end position. Cam had 8.5 sacks, which was in a down year for him. Davenport, Turner, Passanio, and Granderson had 10 sacks combined. That number has got to increase. That's why they drafted Isaiah Foskey. But a guy like Frank Clark, is going to put pressure on the passer. And the knock on Clark, especially over the last couple of years, has always been he's extremely vulnerable against the run, especially when you run right at him. But he wouldn't need to play that role in a with prominent snaps in New Orleans. We know that Granderson, we know that Passanio can play the run. Foskey sure as hell looked like he could play the run when I watched film on him. So, Frank Clark is a guy that you could use as a rotational pass rusher on third down situations, late in games when teams are trying to come back on you. Meanwhile, that would be a defined role for Frank. Meanwhile, on the flip side, for a Hunter Renfrow or a James Washington, you don't necessarily have a defined role for them. You have defined roles for your top three receivers, assuming, knock on wood, they all stay healthy. Everybody else is going to be fighting hard for playing time. And listen, I'm all about good competition. But when you overflood a position with too much, then a lot of times that has a negative effect on the position itself. So, like I said, I'd be okay if the Saints didn't bring in either. But with at least with Frank Clark, you have a defined role for him. Plus, you're not going to have to give up any trade assets, be it players or future picks, which is more likely to be the scenario if you swing a trade for a Hunter Renfrow. So if you absolutely force me to pick one of the two, I'd say I'd go for Frank Clark. And given Dennis Allen's MO the last couple of years, like you pointed out, it seems to be Dennis Allen's MO to bring in a veteran front seven defender. which we've seen a couple free agent moves, but we've always seen another veteran brought in just between OTAs and training camp. So, stay tuned.
And remember, to your point about having a defined role, Frank Clark's going to be 30 in June. He does have a pair of Super Bowls. He was a part of what I guess you'd consider the bare end of the Legion of Boom era.
That's right. He was.
That's where he was drafted. So, he has experience playing with winning franchises. He hasn't had a double-digit sack season in a couple years. I want to say 3 or 4 years, but was a major contributor in the playoffs to both Chiefs championship runs. I think having a guy like that on your side is invaluable. You even look at the Saints defense right now, right? And we always sing the praises of Demario Davis and Cameron Jordan. Neither of those guys have Super Bowl experience, right? You even look at guys that they signed last offseason that people spoke really highly of in Marcus May. No deep playoff. You don't even have to say Super Bowl, like deep playoff run experience. No deep playoff run experience. Tyrann Mathieu, Super Bowl experience. Daniel Passanio, Super Bowl experience. And I know that's like the Saints like pulling out of the Chiefs. It's fine. But really, outside of, and I really have to sit and look at the roster. Because to your point, Ross, at the very beginning of the show, roster turnover, it's like 33% of your roster is different every year. It's like a third of your roster is different. I don't know how many Saints are left from that team that made the NFC title game. Right? Like right off the top of my head, I'm like, okay, Cam, DeMario, Lattimore. Out of starters from last year on the defensive side. That's the 3 I got unless I'm missing somebody.
No, that sounds about right. And then offensively, you have more. You have Thomas, Kamara, Ramczyk, Pete. McCoy was on that team, right?
Yes.
No, he wasn't.
No.
Was he?
Yes. Would have been his first year.
Okay. But again, not a lot of guys.
Right.
So just what combined, and lots too if you want to consider kicker. Combined, I think we didn't even name 10 players.
Right. And I mean, you could go back and look at some of these guys they've brought on over the years, free agents, more than the draft, obviously more than the draft picks. The draft picks wouldn't make any sense. But I'm sure there's been guys that have been added that have deep playoff run experience. But organically, there's not a lot of guys left that were on those teams. And even the teams after that, right? Like 19, I know they got knocked out in the wild card round. 20, obviously, the disappointment of 20. That should have been a championship year as well, or at least an NFC title trip. There's not a lot of guys left that have that experience, and I think that experience is just invaluable to anybody in any sport. Having guys on your roster that go, "Hey, this is what it takes to get there." That's so invaluable, and that's another reason I think you could make the case with Frank Clark is we talked about the youth on that team and just being able to play at the NFL level, but you talk about a guy that has played again with the Legion of Boom, one of the greatest defenses in the history of the NFL, and you have a guy who's won 2 Super Bowls. Yes, Patrick Mahomes, but again, Clark was a huge part of what they were able to do defensively in those playoffs. I mean, that type of stuff to a guy who's my age or younger is really, really valuable. So again, that's why I'd pick Frank Clark. I do want to talk about rookie minicamp a little bit before we go, as it's getting closer to 10 o'clock Eastern. Rookie minicamp's a weird time because you have guys, obviously your draft picks, you have your undrafted free agents, and you got just your invite guys where nothing's guaranteed. We're going to throw you a little bit of money to come hang out for a week. It's really about it. See what you got. See if you can earn yourself an invite to training camp. Now, it is nice to see that the Saints have all but one draftee that has officially signed. It's nice to see these guys in the black and gold.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that stood out to people that have been there, obviously I'm not down there, you're not down there, is these guys seem pretty comfortable. They're not asking them to do a whole lot, right? More than anything, it's an educational experience more than anything. It's let's get you caught up with the lingo, like I mentioned earlier. Let's see the things that, it's one thing to watch tape, it's another thing to see you live. Let's see what you do really well. So from what I understand, first round pick Brian Breezy has impressed, along with your guy. We're just going to call him your guy. A.T. Perry has impressed as well. So when you're looking into rookie minicamp and OTAs and all these things, Bob, what are some things that you're looking out for? What are some things that you've heard in your circles that Saints fans should be excited about?
Absolutely nothing. And I don't mean that
I
mean, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but we've seen so many training camp darlings over the years. New Orleans especially is infamous for training camp darlings at both running back and the wide receiver position. May I bring up names like Darius Victor, Adrian Arrington. I could go on, but we don't have enough time left in the show. So I don't pay a lot of attention to that. It's vital for me, for these guys, especially your top picks, to just not get hurt in some kind of stupid freak injury. But at the same time, I always view things, as you know, Brendan, and as you folks know, if you followed me, followed us for a while, I often view things as a coach. Through a coach's eyes, I think things like this rookie mini camp, the two quote unquote mandatory mini camps coming up, and of course OTAs, that's so important for the coaches, because as you pointed out, Brendan, it does give them the chance, the rookies and the new faces, to kind of, I'm not going to say hit the ground running, but at least get more familiar with helmets and pads on, even if you're not in full uniform, helmets and pads on while running the skeleton version of your playbook. So you're not, these new faces aren't going in blind. You're literally just kind of getting your feet wet, and it's, other than that, it's a great opportunity for the undrafted guys. I know I just poked fun at the training camp darlings over the years, but this is also the time. Now is the time when the Pierre Thomases, the Rashid Shaheeds, the Deontay Harrises, that's when they are first turning these coaches' attentions. It doesn't just happen like that, overnight in training camp. It starts now in rookie mini camp and OTAs. A great example of that was one of their tryout invites, running back Ellis Merriweather, an undrafted guy from UMass. He wasn't even signed to a contract by New Orleans after the draft. He was a Green Bay Packer invitee to their rookie camp last weekend. Didn't get offered a deal after their sessions, so he was invited to Saints camp and impressed Dennis Allen and company enough to get offered a deal. So it's those kind of things that Saints fans should really be watching for. What kind of undrafted guys are making an impression now? Because if they don't start making an impression until the second week of training camp, it's probably too late for them to earn a roster spot. Earning a roster spot for those guys start right now.
Well, and you can look at guys for New Orleans where it was the exact opposite. One that, and I'll never forget, because it was one of the most read, if not the most read article I had while I was with Saints News, was on Tommy Stevens.
Yeah.
And that whole process. Tommy Stevens didn't last long because he didn't impress now, right? He was a Panther by the end of training camp.
I don't even think he made it through training camp, did he? They were still having 2 rounds of cuts then, and he was in the first round of cuts, if I'm not mistaken.
And he didn't impress, despite all of the, I don't want to call it nonsense, but it's really what it was just the pettiness to go get a guy because your opponent wanted him. Whatever. whatever whatever that was. But nonetheless, I mean, he didn't impress, right? So he ended up getting cut loose. And you have guys that do impress, to Bob's point, and end up making the roster, and sometimes actually sticking around for a while. You look at guys like the most cut guys in New Orleans Saints history. JT Barrett impressed in rookie camp enough to be the practice squad quarterback for like 2 years. Andy Tanner, that's a throwback.
That's when I said Adrian Arrington, I knew that there was another receiver that was like right here in my brain. I couldn't. But
Andy
that's who it was.
Tanner just stuck around for a couple years as well. I want to say he stuck around for like 3 years of being a guy where it was like, oh, he might make the roster this year, and you're like really rooting for him. Like, yeah, Andy, you're gonna do it. A guy that didn't have a lot of success in New Orleans, but a couple years in New Orleans, a couple touchdown receptions. In Austin Carr, who was an undrafted guy out of Northwestern, impressed New England, performed really well in New England, got cut by New England, ended up finding his way and playing a couple years here in New Orleans. So definitely look out for the guys that are being signed right now, right? I'm sure you've seen a lot of names that have came across, probably 4 or 5 graphics that have came across social media about the Saints have signed so-and-so. And your mind is, I've never heard of this guy. What does this mean? But definitely keep an eye out for those guys that get signed, because they definitely, like to Bob's point, they came in with an invite, no contract, and they earned their way into at least some non-guaranteed deal where they're going to be with the team in training camp. And that doesn't go unnoticed. And those are the guys that could end up sneaking in and making your 53-man or making your practice squad and making a difference. I'm all about shouting out Gardner Webb today, so I'll do it one more time. Isaiah Gathings started his career at Gardner Webb, went to Middle Tennessee State as a receiver, was invited to try out as a tight end for the New York Jets last week. End up signing a non-guaranteed deal with the Jets by the end of it as an out-of-position player. Those are the guys you have to watch out for. Because those are the guys, like I said, are either going to crack the roster or make the practice squad that you've never heard of before, and they're going to be your training camp darlings for this year. And as much as Bob just joked about training camp darlings, sometimes training camp darlings end up working out, whether it's in New Orleans or whether it's somewhere else. Taysom Hill. How did I forget Taysom Hill in terms of undrafted guys? Now, he wasn't an invite. He actually was offered a contract and signed and was with Green Bay. He wasn't a mini camp invite. But that's a good example of a guy that undrafted, had to fight his way, got cut, ended up in New Orleans. Boston Scott was a draft pick, a late-round draft pick. Ended up, impressing in New Orleans enough to where when he got cut, he ended up in Philly and was a part of that team that just made a Super Bowl run. So, I mean, those are the guys you got to watch out for. And it's way too early to even be talking about mini camp. Nobody says mini camp darlings, right?
Yeah.
Rookie mini camp darling.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, forget half speed. These guys don't even go at quarter speed in these drills. They're just kind of jogging around, walking around, lobbing passes to each other. So, anybody, I just chuckle at, Brzee and Foskey, they really look good. Really? Because how much contact is there in these things? There never was very much, and now at the NFL and players union, it pretty much dictates that you could barely touch these guys. So the offensive, defensive linemen, even the linebackers, there's going to be literally zero contact. It's just all about them listening to coaches' instructions and seeing how they respond to that. That's where, that's what getting the feet wet means for those guys right now. And the guys like A.T. Perry, I mentioned Merriweather, the other undrafted running backs, Roderick Thompson, Kendry Miller couldn't even participate because he's not fully medically cleared yet. It's just about those guys doing, again, things at quarter speed, if that. So literally pay zero attention to that. You hope your high draft picks, knock on wood, and new faces don't get any freak injuries at this time of year. That's what I watch for.
And when they say they look good, it just means that they're in shape. Like that's
Yeah.
what I take from it. They didn't show up to, this is so mean, but it's okay. They didn't show up to camp like Kelvin Benjamin did however many years ago for Carolina, where people are saying he's literally bigger than tight ends on this roster. That's all that means. Just means, and they should, rightfully so. Like they're only 4 months removed from
Right.
playing college football. Like you should be in shape. You were just doing combines and pro days. You should be in shape. Listen, a couple Big Macs aren't going to put you over. You know what I mean? Or whatever kids eat. Now I sound old. Whatever kids eat nowadays. But nonetheless, yeah, so that's what to take away from rookie mini camp. Like we said, definitely pay attention to the names that have got signed from their invites. Those are going to be guys to watch throughout the OTAs and the training camp process. Remember, this year's going to be different, and we'll keep saying it, is only one round of cuts this year.
Yeah.
Opposed to the multiple. So cut day is going to be a really busy day for Saints News Network. Good luck.
It's nuts.
Good luck. May the force be with you. We got a long way to go.
Yeah.
Before that, Bob, as we close out the show, we'll do very quick, one off each side, dot or drop.
Sounds good.
All right. So, and this is going to go back and sorry guys, we actually talked about a lot tonight. So I'm going to go to a question from earlier in regards to DeMarco Jackson. Who you wrote a piece on not too long ago. Dot or drop, DeMarco Jackson will compete for a starting job in New Orleans.
If by starting you mean when they trot out their base 4-3 alignment, I'm going to say dot. DeMarco Jackson is not going to beat out Demario Davis or Pete Werner for sure. I still say, we both said it during our draft coverage, that we believe Zach Bond is going to be given the first crack, to play the role that Caden Ellis did, for the last 2 or 3 years. And people, don't forget, people, that Caden Ellis had his breakout season only because Pete Werner got hurt. Otherwise, Caden Ellis was just an early down guy, short yardage, goal line situations. So, Zach is going to be given a first crack at that. But I think DeMarco Jackson beats him out. I think DeMarco Jackson is a better player, has better versatility, much better range, and I believe that because of what they think, they being the Saints coaches, because of what they think they have in DeMarco Jackson, I think that's why you didn't see them sign a free agent linebacker or draft one, because they know what they have. They think they know what they have in DeMarco Jackson, and they feel very confident with it. And DeMarco and Zach Bond both are going to be given the bulk of these snaps in the mini camps, in the OTAs. If it doesn't look like either one is going to work out a little bit, or they're a little bit shaky, that's when you'll see them go out and get a veteran. But I truly believe, and I've been a fan of this kid before last year's draft, as you know, I'm going dot. DeMarco Jackson is going to be the third linebacker in their 4-3 alignment.
Love it. Love small school kids. Love small school kids from North Carolina. He's an App State kid. He's undersized, but we've seen some undersized linebackers in New Orleans be pretty successful over the years as well.
Yeah. You swipe from my daughter drop. It was linebacker related. So I'll go on the other side. I'll go on the other side of the ball. Since we kept saying that we talk about him and we only touched on him, my daughter drop for you is daughter drop. James Washington will be the number 4 receiver for the New Orleans Saints this year, or at least compete hard for it.
Compete hard, dot. Being number 4. Well, Mike, Chris, Rashid. And then it's really up for grabs, whether it's James,
Yeah.
whether it's Traquan. You got that list of guys that have been practice squad or barely on the team. Do I go out on a major limb and say my guy Keith Kirkwood makes the number 4? I don't think it's going to happen. He might be like the 5th or 6th. He'll probably end up being a practice squad guy yet again.
Okay.
But I'll say drop, and this isn't going to make you happy at all. But the thing with James Washington is, even coming out of Oklahoma State, right? It was like big play guy. And he had a couple years of that in Pittsburgh, and then it kind of just like fell off the side of a mountain.
Yeah.
And there's multiple reasons for that, right? Ben's health over the end of it. And not even his health. Ben was just like a tree in the pocket, right? Like a well-rooted tree. He couldn't move. I felt bad, like genuinely bad for Ben towards the end. And I don't think he had the arm to get it where it needed to be either. Like Ben, the last 2 years in Pittsburgh was really just a shell of himself.
Yeah, it was painful to watch.
It was hard to watch, right? It was almost, some people agree, some people won't. It was almost like that last year of Peyton Manning, where you just flipped on the TV and you're like, who the hell is that?
Yeah.
So I'm really thankful that we never had to experience that with Drew. We saw some decline in the arm strength, but we never just woke up one day to cover a game. We're like, who is that?
Yeah, who stole my quarterback?
Yeah, and that's what it felt like. It felt like the Space Jam movie. Like somebody stole the Monstars stole the powers of Big Ben and Peyton Manning. And regardless of what kind of fan you are, if you're even the diehard Saints fans, you have to respect what those guys did. And that era of quarterbacks, I don't know if we'll ever see that much talent at one time again. Brady, Manning, Breeze, Manning, Rivers, Big Ben, like those guys are all Hall of Famers. You can throw Matt Ryan in there too, if you want to. Hall of Famer, like it or not. The numbers are there, and he's got an MVP, which he probably shouldn't have got, but just conversation for a different day.
Right.
Going back, I think Derek Carr can unlock some of that with James Washington again, but James Washington is also going to be 28. And that's not old by any means, but the running back and the receiver positions, that magic number of 30, that magic number, it's creeping up. You might get like 2 good years out of it. But there's this guy who wears number 10 in New Orleans who also was projected to be a deep threat guy, has proven at times he shows flashes in a pan that he can be. And I've said this on record, and again, Bob's not going to like this at all. I think he gets more hate than he really needs to, because I think the expectation levels for Traquan coming in were a lot higher than they needed to be.
I will agree with that, yeah.
But I think he's a serviceable NFL receiver. And honestly, for a 3rd-round pick, I think he's done fine for his career.
You're right. You do need coffee and sleep.
Okay, thanks, Bob. But I think just with the familiarity of the system, obviously the team likes him or he still wouldn't be around because they've had plenty of opportunities to move on. I think he's going to beat him out for the 4th spot. I think James Washington stays on the roster as kind of like we're gonna really test Saints fans' knowledge this late at night. I think he's going to be run a little bit like Joe Morgan was for the Saints for like 2 years, right? He's going to get somewhere between 10 and 20 catches a year, but he's really like, anytime you see him prop out there, he's either going deep or he's going to get like a receiver screen and they're just going to try to get the ball in his hands. I think that's kind of where he's at in his career.
Well, just like Joe Morgan, James Washington can't run routes. He only has 2 routes. The fly. 3: the fly pattern, the deep post, and the wide receiver screen. He cannot run any other kind of route.
Right. So I mean, that's where I kind of see it. And then if the Saints decide to keep a 6th receiver, that's up in the air. But I'm gonna say drop. I think Washington's more slotted for the 5th. I think Traquan, especially in the final year of his contract, is going to be slotted in 4. And I don't know if he's going to get another contract, but again, with his familiarity of the system, his ability to, be a little versatile in terms of he's got size, he's a decent blocker, those type of things that have kept him on the roster. I think he's going to be slotted in at 4. So we'll close the night on Bob having to rip his ears off for me saying positive things about his favorite New Orleans Saint.
Well, and not only that, but you also just said without saying that you don't believe at this stage in May, for as little as that's worth. But as we sit here in mid-May, you also just told me without telling me that you don't believe A.T. Perry's going to make the roster. Because you just mentioned Traquan at number 4. Yeah, if you think that James Washington is going to be that Joe Morgan, number 5 guy,
A.T. Perry would have to be 6.
Yeah, and they're only going to keep a 6th receiver if he's a return specialist. And I love A.T. Perry, but that ain't going to be him.
I was going to say, well, unless the Saints. I was going to say Rashid Shaheed's, to me, a lot of people have slotted him in as being like receiver 3.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in that boat of people. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the Saints do, because last year the Saints had the luxury of a couple guys that could return the ball.
Yeah.
Right? Even with the mess of injuries that Deontay Hardy had, which I don't blame him for. He was hurt. And then they got to a point in the year where he got outplayed and there was no reason for him to come back. But you did have Hardy available if you ever really needed him. Kamara has returned kicks and punts before. Right now, looking at the roster, I see Rashid Shaheed. That's it. I mean, there's not a lot of guys behind him. So I think naturally the Saints have to be more careful of, well, how many routes do we want this guy running?
Yeah.
So I think with that too, you're going to see, while Shaheed was explosive because he had to be their number 2 receiver, I think you're going to see that same explosiveness in smaller spurts, right? Like he's not going to be playing like 60, 70% of the snaps anymore offensively. So I think the Saints have to be careful. Kind of what Deontay Hardy was his last full season in New Orleans, where we're like, wow, he's making improvements as a receiver, but they were like flashes in a pan, right? It wasn't anything consistent. So with that, you could almost move Perry into the 5th slot, right? Because you're going to see Shaheed get less touches. But who knows? Maybe James Washington doesn't even make the team, right? There's a lot of things that could happen. I don't think Perry's not going to make the team. I think the Saints are going to have to be extra critical of the receiver position this year.
They are.
And I do think that they'll keep 6 because Mike Thomas. Like, we don't know. We just don't. And going back, I said we'd get back to it, so I'll get back to it at the very end of the show here. DJ from Facebook says, I think Mike Thomas is done. I know the report said, yeah, training camp. I get the fact. I don't agree with fans that say that, but I understand where they're at.
Yeah.
Right? I completely understand the thought of, I can't trust this guy to be healthy anymore. I understand that. I don't agree with it. Because, I mean, not that Bob and I have these little birds that know everything that talk in our ears, but based off of everything that Bob and I have heard, he's going to be more than fine come training camp. And Mike also understands that this is a prove-it year, not just for his Saints life, but his NFL life, his money, everything. Because even if he has a decent year in New Orleans, that doesn't guarantee the Saints bring him back.
No, but he's going to make big money somewhere.
Somewhere, right. Someone will pay him if he can stay healthy, have a decent season. I'm not talking decent to Mike Thomas standards. I'm talking decent to NFL standards. Because Mike Thomas standards are super high. I don't think he's done, but I also understand that fans are frustrated. Fans don't know if they can trust him anymore. And I also think the Saints have to be super cautious, right? They have to, and Mike does too. Like everybody, I think at this point are on the same page. And with that said, A.T. Perry is going to make the team based off of size. One name I didn't include on that list,
Ryan Edwards. Yeah, neither of us, but we both overlooked that one.
And I don't know if he'll make the roster. I don't know if he'll be just a camp body to kind of get Carr situated, or if Carr's going to have a little bit of say on if there's a hey, it's really between Washington and Edwards. Who do you want? If Carr is going to get a final say in some of that stuff, that's going to be interesting.
If A.T. Perry is as good as I think he is going to be, and you guys could joke about that all you want, but if A.T. is as good as I think he's going to be, then I don't believe of the three veterans, Traquan, Brian Edwards, and now James Washington, two of those three do not make this team if A.T. Perry is good. And everybody else, knock on wood, and everybody else stays healthy. At least two of the three don't make this team. That's just the way this roster plays out. And now they trade for Hunter Renfrow. Yeah, if that happens, and folks, I never believed that was going to happen. That's the fans talking. That's not even any legitimate NFL rumor or whispers going on. That's just fans that want their team to trade for Hunter Renfrow. And Brandon and I get it, as we said earlier. But I think James Washington and even Brian Edwards have uphill climbs to beat out Traquan. And I hate myself for saying this, but it's based purely off Traquan Smith's knowledge and experience in the system. Now, that experience is putrid, but it means something to the coaches because they not only keeping him around, the last 2 years they've re-signed him to bring him back. So I don't get it, but it's just it's the reality of the New Orleans Saints receiver position.
Well, I'll tell you this. I had to look it up because you said putrid, and I was like, has it really been that? Like, I don't think it's been that bad. This is per his Pro Football Reference page. He has appeared in 66 games with 131 receptions for 1,700 yards and 8 touchdowns. While the numbers in terms of receptions and yards are certainly not where you want them to be by any means.
Well, and I'm going to interrupt you. Take out 3 games. Take out Washington his rookie year, Philadelphia his rookie year, and Carolina last year when they were heaving the ball in desperation to come from behind, and Thomas and Landry were already out. Take out those 3 games and then do the math. It is putrid.
That's fair. I've always stood behind the fact, and I'd have to double check the numbers now because things have changed over the last couple years. But I'd always stood behind the fact that you exclude Michael Thomas, and since 2016, Traquan Smith has the most receiving touchdowns of any New Orleans Saint. I think that's still true. I have to double check my numbers, but I think that's still true. Some of that's just the fact he's been around that long.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do quick math before we end the show. And I like this because it's funny. Let's see, 66 games, 18 touchdowns. So unless my math is terrible, right? So you're at a little under a quarter of every catch is a touchdown. Maybe 1 in 5 catches is a touchdown. Somewhere in that range.
That part's not so bad until you consider the few amount of catches he actually has.
I'm sorry, that's games played. So about let's see, 131 catches, 18 touchdowns. So I'm sorry, I did games played. See, that's how tired I am. 131 games played. I can't do math right now, but
we went way over as it is, and
no point. Point.
And I don't want to cost us more sleep by talking about Traquan friggin' Smith.
Hey, he's gonna make the roster though. You just said admitted it too, because he's going to make the roster. But nonetheless, guys, real quick, Bob, where can everybody follow you on the World Wide Web and keep up with all your work? Is the posts or are we in preseason, postseason? We're stuck in limbo between that.
We'll call it pre-preseason.
Pre-preseason. As the pre-preseason continues, where can people follow you?
Folks, thank you for tuning in with Brandon and I tonight, as always. You can follow my work on Facebook, Bob Rose. I'm on Twitter at BobbyR2613.
please follow all of us at the Saints News Network, at Saints News on Twitter, or jump onto si.com and subscribe to the New Orleans Saints team page where we do all the New Orleans Saints coverage. We will be doing pieces. This time of year, it's a stretch for some networks, not us. We're giving you 2-3 pieces a day, legitimate editorials. I'm going to delve into some historical pieces, which I always love to do. This can be a fun time of year for me. I love to do the historical pieces. So make sure you tune in, and make sure you follow our Bayou Blitz pages too. Bayou Blitz on Facebook and at Bayou Blitz Pod. Did I get that right? Yeah. Well, yeah. At Bayou Blitz at Bayou Blitz Pod on Twitter. We say it week in and week out, and we truly mean it. This is coming from the heart. This is your show. We do this for you guys. We have a blast for you guys because of you guys. So make this product grow, and you can help do that by sending people over to those 2 pages on Facebook and Twitter. You've made this product truly fun to do. So keep making this your show and keep making it grow.
It's a lot of fun when we can go on tangents and look at the time and be like, dang, we've talked about Traquan Smith for 20 minutes.
Shame on us.
And no, it's fun. It's fun. I enjoy doing it every week, regardless of what state in the country I'm in. But lately I've been in North Carolina, so that's been nice. For me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at BT Boylan. I'll throw this out there one more time, and Bob and I will iron out the details, but Bob's going to be joining my podcast on Bottom of the Mug Productions. Really excited to have him on to kind of dive into his background, his story with the Thoughts of Bruin podcast. I host that with Thomas Manning, an award-winning filmmaker. He's also a part of the Southeastern Film Critics Association. So he's done a great job throughout his career storytelling. So having Bob to come on and tell his story is going to be awesome. So definitely check that out. We'll definitely.
And I apologize in advance.
Oh God, come on, man! You have you don't give yourself enough credit. You've seen and lived a lot of things. You got to play pro volleyball. There's other sides of your story. We'll just let the podcast do the storytelling. But I mean, you're a Hall of Fame coach. You've played pro volleyball. You're writing for Sports Illustrated's online publication. So I mean, there's not a lot of people get to do those 3 things in life, and the fact that you've kind of maneuvered your way through all of it's really, really neat. And I can't wait to kind of dive into everything with you. But check out that podcast. Check out what I have coming up over there, and obviously the Saints coverage that we have here with the Bayou Blitz. Give us a follow on Twitter. We're gonna do another giveaway sometime in this preseason, sometime before training camp. Whatever season you want to call that, that's when you should go on Twitter and tag us and tell us what we should call this time of season. Is it the postseason? Is it the preseason? Is it the preseason? Is it too late and we're just rambling on about seasons? I don't know. But nonetheless, guys, we appreciate you guys hanging out with us every Wednesday night. We'll be back next Wednesday for more New Orleans Saints. That's Bob Rose. I'm Brendan Boylan. Until then, find some peace, spread love, practice positivity. Thanks for tuning in for the Bayou Blitz podcast.
Night all.